All right, so we're diving into something pretty heavy today.
Yeah.
Barebacking in the gay male community.
hmm
And, looking at the research and personal stories, it's a lot.
It is.
We've got research papers, historical analysis.
Right.
It's complex.
It really is a topic that requires, I think, a nuanced approach.
Yeah, and sensitive for sure.
Yeah.
But our goal here isn't to judge.
No.
It's to understand, right,
Absolutely.
what are the motivations?
Yeah.
And I have to say, one of the things that's really fascinating is how many different areas this connects to.
Yeah.
We're talking about history, psychology, even the internet.
Yeah.
This is way more than just risky sex.
It is. And to really understand it, I think you kind of have to go back to the 70s and kind of look at the historical context.
Okay.
So the sources take us back to this period that's really marked by both the sexual liberation and the gay liberation movements.
So before AIDS, before the crisis, we have this sort of like a collision of these two movements
Right.
that are all about sexual freedom,
Yeah.
greater expression.
Right. Yeah.
Did that have an immediate impact on gay culture?
I think it did, especially when you think about all of the other changes that were happening at the time, socially and culturally.
Okay.
You think about the emergence of bathhouses and sex clubs,
Right.
and there was this kind of open embrace of, casual sex with multiple partners.
Right.
So that period really sets the stage for how we understand barebacking today.
So you have that.
Yeah.
It's like a whole different world than what came after.
Yeah,
and then
man.
boom,
Right.
AIDS hits.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine what that did to the community.
Oh, it was a turning point, without a doubt.
Right.
And you had fear,
Yeah.
uncertainty,
Yeah.
a lot of devastating loss of life,
Right.
and it really forced a shift in sexual practices.
Yeah.
You had organizations like the San Francisco AIDS Foundation really rising to promote safe sex and condom use.
Right. Right. And this is where things, I think, get complicated with the word barebacking itself.
Yeah.
Even defining it.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It is tricky.
It is tricky, because the sort of straightforward definition is intentional unprotected sex.
Okay.
But then, over time, it's kind of become a bit more ambiguous.
Right.
So some of the sources we're looking at, they use it for, any instance of anal sex without a condom,
Okay.
regardless of HIV status.
Okay.
But then some people are very clear that the intention is part of the definition.
So I guess the question is, if both partners are HIV positive, is that barebacking?
Right.
Or what if they're both negative? Where do you draw the line?
That's exactly it. That's the crux of it, and that's why this evolving definition, really kind of makes an impact on how we understand, the research and even just people's personal experiences.
Right. Right.
It really kind of highlights the need for really clear and consistent language
Right.
when we're talking about these really sensitive topics.
And speaking of complexities, let's talk about why people engage in barebacking.
Okay.
One of the biggest ones I saw in the sources is medical advancements.
Right.
Things like the introduction of HAART.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, HAART increased survival rates,
Right.
dramatically improved the quality of life for people living with HIV.
Yeah.
I mean, it really has been something of a medical miracle.
But some of the sources actually suggest that it's also contributed to something called safer sex fatigue.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, it's really a complex phenomenon, and I think it's a great example of how even really positive advancements can have these unintended consequences.
Okay.
There was some research, a study published in the journal AIDS, and it found that men who were on HAART, they were significantly less likely to perceive HIV as a death sentence.
Right.
And this shift in perception, which is understandable, it really correlated with a decrease in condom use.
So it's almost like HAART, even though it was this, this breakthrough,
Yeah.
it also inadvertently shifted the perception of risk
Right.
in a way that we're still dealing with. And I could see how that would contribute to the rise of barebacking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's not as simple as just saying, people just kind of got careless.
Right.
There were these underlying psychological and social shifts happening at the same time as these medical advancements.
Right.
And that's what we have to look at as well.
So it's more than just medical advancements. What about some of the psychological factors?
Right.
Some of the sources really go into people's personal motivations.
Yeah. I think this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Internalized homophobia, for example, is a recurring theme in a lot of the sources we're looking at. That societal stigma, it can lead to, shame and self-hatred.
Right.
And that can potentially kind of push people towards these risky behaviors.
It's almost like they're trying to punish themselves.
Yeah.
Or seeking validation in these dangerous ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Some of the sources also discuss the impact of, the AIDS crisis.
Right.
And, that lingering impact of grief and trauma,
Yeah.
the scale of loss that the gay community experienced
Right.
was profound.
Yeah.
And for some people, barebacking might be this form of self-destruction,
Yeah.
a way of coping with the pain.
Yeah.
It makes you realize we're still dealing with, echoes of that epidemic in so many ways.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's this concept of erotophobia,
Yeah.
which is just this fear of sex itself.
Right.
Because of its association with death and disease during the AIDS crisis. It's like this fascinating paradox
Yeah.
where you have this desire for intimacy,
Yeah.
but also this deeply ingrained fear.
Right. Yeah.
And for some people, navigating those emotions might lead to barebacking.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we've got the deeply personal, the psychological, but then there's also the role of substances that the sources bring up, particularly crystal meth. What's the connection there?
The connection is undeniable.
Okay.
Methamphetamine, it lowers inhibitions,
Right.
Increases libido,
Right.
and it often leads to these really prolonged sexual encounters,
Right.
all of which increase the likelihood of unprotected sex. Yeah, and the sources mention these circuit parties as environments where both meth use and barebacking are prevalent.
Yeah.
I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for risky behavior.
It can be.
Yeah.
You're combining this party atmosphere with drug use and heightened sexuality.
Right.
And it's easy to see how judgment can be impaired.
Right.
So yeah, I think understanding the role of substance use is really crucial when we're talking about barebacking.
Okay, so we've got historical context, psychological factors, substance use. What about the internet?
Oh yeah.
What role does that play?
The internet has and particularly hookup apps has really kind of changed the landscape of you have websites that are specifically catering to men who are seeking unprotected sex.
Right.
And and then you have these practices like Sarah sorting,
Right.
where people try to find partners that have the same HIV status,
Right.
to kind of minimize the risk.
But that doesn't eliminate the risk, though, right?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, what about people who are dishonest about their status?
Yeah.
Or don't know it themselves?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a risky strategy,
Right.
especially considering not everyone has access to regular testing or may not be honest. And then you have even more concerning phenomenon like bug chasing and gift giving,
Right.
where individuals actively seek to become infected with HIV or intentionally infect others.
I don't even know I don't even know where to begin with that. What would motivate someone to engage in those behaviors?
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
Yeah.
Some researchers suggest that it's tied to a desire for acceptance within the HIV positive community.
Okay.
Or a feeling of inevitability about becoming infected. Or even a form of rebellion against the fear and stigma surrounding HIV.
It's a lot to process. So we've got those kind of like the casual encounters happening online.
Yeah.
But some of the sources also talk about barebacking within romantic relationships.
Right.
And that adds a whole other layer.
It does.
You have couples often where one partner is HIV positive, the other is HIV negative, and they engage in what they call negotiated safety.
Yeah.
So they agree to have unprotected sex only with each other.
Yeah.
But that sounds incredibly risky.
It can be.
What if someone breaks the agreement?
Yeah.
What if their status changes and they don't know it?
Exactly. It definitely involves a very high level of of trust
Right.
and open communication.
Yeah.
And it's not without its risks.
Right.
But for some couples, it's a way of navigating the complexities of intimacy and HIV within a committed relationship.
So how do we even begin to address barebacking?
Yeah.
I mean, with all these factors we've talked about.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes up a lot in the sources is this idea of harm reduction.
Okay.
It's this kind of pragmatic approach that focuses on minimizing the negative consequences.
Right.
But without demanding complete abstinence.
Okay, so it's not about like preaching abstinence.
Right.
It's about meeting people where they're at.
Exactly.
Giving them the tools to make safer choices. Does that actually work?
It does. And there's research to back that up.
Okay.
Harm reduction recognizes that that people engage in risky behavior for all sorts of, reasons.
Right.
And it tailors, its approach accordingly.
Right.
So, for barebacking, that might include encouraging condom use.
Right.
Promoting access to POPP,
right,
or education about safer sex practices.
It seems like giving people that agency over their own choices is really key.
It is.
Some of the sources also talk about this technique called motivational interviewing.
Yeah.
Which seems to take that approach even further.
It does. It's I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it kind of flips the script.
Okay.
Instead of lecturing someone about, condom use, a therapist using motivational interviewing, they would actually help you.
Okay.
Explore your own reasons for wanting to stay safe.
Okay. So it's like tapping into your own
exactly
motivation.
Yeah, that intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, which is
and research from from folks like Dr. William Miller show that that's way more powerful than external pressure.
It makes sense. It's like you're more likely to stick with something if it comes from within.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've talked about kind of individual approaches, but what about community level interventions?
Right.
Do any of the sources kind of address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think creating a supportive and open environment, where people feel comfortable talking about their sexual health is so crucial.
Right.
You think about the role of AIDS service organizations,
right,
community health centers,
right,
even online platforms.
Yeah, so much of the barebacking scene is facilitated online.
Right.
Could those same spaces be used for harm reduction?
That's exactly what's happening.
Oh wow.
Yeah, health organizations are starting to use those same spaces to reach people who might not engage with more traditional outreach efforts.
Okay.
It's kind of like
right,
fighting fire with fire.
Right.
Using the internet.
Right.
To promote safer sex.
Okay.
Within the very communities where barebacking is happening.
So what does that actually look like? I mean, do they have people like going into chat rooms?
You got it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there are some really creative initiatives out there.
Okay.
Some organizations are using online platforms for peer counseling.
Okay.
Answering questions about safer sex.
Okay.
Even offering real-time support during hookups.
Yeah.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It seems like there are so many different approaches, which suggests there's no easy answer here.
No, there isn't.
And reading through the sources, I also noticed some ethical questions.
Yeah.
That are raised about barebacking. Is that something we should talk about?
Definitely. It's a discussion that comes up, pretty often, especially when you consider, the potential for HIV transmission.
Right.
One of the debates really centers around this idea of personal responsibility.
Okay.
Versus public health.
Right.
So on the one hand, I think some people would argue that individuals have the right to make their own choices.
Right.
About their sexual behavior.
Yeah.
Even if those choices are risky.
Right. They have the right to to choose what they do with their bodies.
Yeah.
But then others would say,
Right.
but those choices can impact other people.
Exactly.
Especially if someone transmits HIV without their partner's knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a tough issue.
It is. It's a
Yeah.
really, really tough one.
What about the legal side of things?
Oh, yeah.
Did the sources mention anything about that?
They did. A few states actually have laws that specifically, criminalize HIV transmission.
Oh.
But this is another very controversial area.
Yeah.
Some people argue that these laws discourage people from getting tested or disclosing their status.
Right.
For fear of legal repercussions.
Right.
But then others believe that that they're necessary to protect public health.
Right. So it's this tension between
Yeah.
protecting individual rights,
Yeah.
but also the collective responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
To prevent the spread of HIV.
Yeah. It's a real tension.
Yeah.
And finding that that balance.
Yeah.
Is it's a challenge.
Yeah.
For lawmakers and public health officials and just the community as a whole. I think open and honest communication is really
Right.
it's really crucial.
Yeah. Creating a culture where people feel safe
Right.
talking about their sexual health and making informed choices
Yeah.
without fear of judgment
Exactly.
seems essential.
It is. It's about fostering this sense of a shared responsibility
Right.
for sexual health, both individually
Yeah.
and as a community.
So we've touched on historical context, psychological factors, substance use, the impact of the internet, ethical considerations.
Yeah.
This is a lot.
It is.
I have to admit this deep dive is already challenging some of my own assumptions.
I think that's that's the beauty of of exploring a topic like this.
Yeah.
It forces us to kind of look beyond the surface and really grapple with the complexities.
Right.
And it really kind of highlights just how diverse the experiences are within the gay male community.
Reading those personal accounts in the source material, I
Yeah.
was struck by just the shame
Yeah.
and guilt
Yeah.
that a lot of people associate with barebacking. And it made me realize we need more compassion in how we approach these conversations.
We do. We absolutely do. I think instead of judging or shaming, we need to create safe spaces where people feel comfortable discussing their experiences and seeking support.
Yeah, everyone's journey with their sexual health
Right.
is different.
It is.
And it's not really our place to dictate
No.
what's right or wrong.
Right.
But I think providing accurate information
Right.
and resources
Yeah.
so people can make informed choices
Yeah.
that align with their values and protect their well-being.
Absolutely.
That's really crucial.
It is.
And this brings us back to to the term barebacking itself
Yeah.
and the different interpretations.
Yeah.
Earlier we talked about if both partners are HIV positive, is that really barebacking?
Yeah.
And what about this practice of Sarah sorting? Is that considered barebacking?
It's a great question, and I think it really kind of highlights the fluid nature
Yeah.
of the term.
Hmm.
I think when both partners are HIV positive,
Yeah.
the intention behind not using condoms might be more about intimacy and connection
Okay.
rather than intentionally seeking risk.
Huh.
And Sarah sorting also kind of blurs those lines,
Right.
because it involves choosing partners with the same HIV status.
So it's not always black and white.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, and that kind of reinforces the importance of having these nuanced conversations
Right.
and avoiding generalizations.
Yeah. It seems like this idea of the AIDS crisis, like
Yeah.
lasting impact,
Yeah.
keeps coming up.
Yeah.
It's like this ghost that's hanging over
It is.
everything we've talked about.
Yeah, it's undeniable. That trauma and grief and sense of loss, it still really permeates the gay community, even decades later.
Right.
And these experiences, they really continue to shape attitudes towards sex and HIV.
It's like this collective memory that's informing our understanding of risk.
Yeah.
and intimacy.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that sexual health isn't just about individual choices.
Yeah.
It's also about the social and historical context
Right.
in which those choices are made.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Like, we're all carrying the weight of history
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah.
But barebacking isn't just about the emotional
Right.
and psychological weight. There's also that physical aspect to it, right?
Right. The sources, they mention that that barebacking can provide a different kind of physical sensation
Right.
compared to protected sex.
Right. There's like a rawness,
Yeah.
an intensity
Mhm.
that some people find appealing.
Yeah.
Even if it comes with that,
Right.
that inherent risk
Yep.
of HIV transmission.
Right. And for some, it's about feeling closer to their partner,
Right.
both physically
Right.
and emotionally.
Right.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that that the risk is real.
Yeah.
And it can be amplified by certain factors.
We talked about meth earlier.
Yeah.
But other substances like cocaine
Right.
and ecstasy
Yeah.
were also mentioned in the sources. What role did those play?
Very similar to methamphetamine. They can lower inhibitions
Right.
and increase libido.
Right.
So making risky sexual behavior more likely.
Okay.
And environments like circuit parties,
Right.
where substance use and barebacking are often kind of co-occurring.
Yeah.
Can be particularly dangerous.
Yeah, it's a bit scary to think about the potential consequences.
It is, but I think it underscores, the need for harm reduction strategies.
Right.
In those settings.
Right.
Making sure that people have access to condoms,
Right.
clean needles,
Yeah.
and information about safer sex.
And support for those struggling with addiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about protecting people's health and well-being,
Right.
and creating a culture where those conversations are normalized and encouraged.
Reading through these sources, I'm noticing this theme
Yeah.
of power and control.
Okay,
That seems to be intertwined with barebacking.
that's interesting. How so?
Well, on a personal level, there's the power dynamic
Okay.
between partners in a relationship.
Right.
One person might feel pressured
Yeah.
into barebacking, even if they're not comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Consent and open communication are just so crucial
Yeah.
in any sexual relationship,
Right.
regardless of HIV status.
And then there's the power dynamic between the HIV positive and HIV negative communities.
Right.
Where stigma and discrimination still exist.
Yeah.
And that can lead to, to this perception of hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like being HIV negative is somehow
Right.
superior.
Yeah.
And that can lead to internalized homophobia
Yeah.
and fuel risky behavior.
Yeah.
It's this vicious cycle.
Yeah, it is. And dismantling those harmful power structures really requires challenging those ingrained attitudes and beliefs.
Yeah, promoting equality
Yeah.
so that everyone feels
Right.
safe and respected.
Absolutely.
Regardless of their HIV status.
Yeah. And speaking of challenging beliefs, one of the most surprising things I came across in the research was this phenomenon of bug chasing.
Yeah, where people intentionally
Yeah.
try to become infected with HIV.
Yeah.
It's still something I find so hard to understand.
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to do that?
It's another complex issue
Yeah.
with a range of possible motivations. Some researchers suggest that that it's tied to a desire for acceptance,
Okay.
within the HIV positive community,
Okay.
or a feeling that that, infection is inevitable.
Right.
Others point to, a sense of rebellion.
Okay.
Against, against the fear and stigma surrounding HIV.
It's like they're trying to reclaim their sexuality.
Yeah.
And reject this idea.
Yeah.
That HIV is a death sentence.
Yeah, I think that might be part of it for some.
Right.
But it's incredibly risky behavior.
Yeah.
With serious potential consequences.
Yeah, it definitely brings up ethical questions about your responsibility to protect yourself and others.
It does, yeah. And it really kind of highlights the need for continued education and prevention efforts.
Right.
And support systems. We really need to create a culture where people feel safe and empowered to make informed choices about their sexual health.
So we've really explored the complexities of barebacking,
Yeah.
but what about the the bigger picture?
Yeah.
What does this all mean for the gay community and beyond?
That's a great question. I think barebacking really forces us to confront these fundamental issues.
Okay.
About sexuality and health and responsibility.
Right.
How do we balance individual freedom with the well-being of the community?
Right.
How do we promote both pleasure and safety?
Right.
Those are the questions that we really need to grapple with.
Yeah.
I think this deep dive has really kind of provided us with some valuable insights to inform those discussions.
I agree. By understanding the historical, the psychological, the social dynamics at play,
Right.
we can move towards those more nuanced and compassionate conversations.
Yeah.
And ultimately work towards a healthier
Yeah.
and more supportive environment
Absolutely.
for everyone.
Yeah.
One of the biggest takeaways for me is this concept of harm reduction.
Yeah.
We've touched on it throughout the episode, but could you just kind of elaborate on what that actually looks like?
Sure. I think harm reduction starts with recognizing that people engage in risky behaviors for all sorts of reasons.
Right.
And instead of judging or shaming,
Right.
it's about meeting them where they are,
Right.
and providing them with the tools,
Right.
and the information, to make safer choices. So that might include encouraging condom use, promoting HIV testing and access to pre-EP,
Right.
offering education about safer sex practices.
So it's about empowering people
Mm-hmm.
to take control of their sexual health, while also acknowledging that
Right.
everyone's journey is different.
Yeah, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. There's no magic bullet here.
No. And that's why having a range of options and approaches
Right.
is so crucial.
Yeah.
People need to find what works best for them and their specific circumstances.
Right. And that kind of brings up this idea of communication again. That seems to be so important.
Yeah, it's foundational, both between partners and within the community as a whole.
Right.
We need to create spaces where people feel comfortable talking about their sexual health.
Right.
Without fear of judgment or stigma.
Because silence only perpetuates the problem.
It does.
It keeps people from getting the information they need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We really need to shift the conversation from shame and blame to empathy and understanding.
Right.
Where people feel empowered to share their experiences and seek help when they need it.
And part of that is acknowledging that impact of trauma and grief.
Yeah.
The AIDS crisis casts a long shadow.
It does.
Its effects are still felt today.
Absolutely. And we need to be sensitive to that.
Right.
And provide support for those struggling to cope with those experiences.
You know, what really struck me in the source material
Yeah.
was the emphasis on community-level
Right.
interventions.
Right. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not just about individual choices.
Yeah.
It's about creating a supportive environment
Yeah.
that actively promotes sexual health.
Absolutely. That could involve educational campaigns, increased access to healthcare, and crucially addressing stigma and discrimination.
Right. So it's about creating a culture where people feel safe
Right.
and empowered
Yeah.
to make those healthy choices and have the resources.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point. We can't just focus on individual behavior. We need to address the systemic factors that contribute to these risky sexual practices. It really requires a collective effort.
Yeah. After going through these sources and realizing how much barebacking is intertwined
Yeah.
with these issues of identity and self-worth.
Yeah. That's a really profound observation.
Yeah.
Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, for some people, barebacking might be this way of seeking validation or connection,
Right.
especially if they've experienced rejection or stigma because of their sexuality or HIV status.
Right. It's about finding belonging
Right.
and acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for others, it might be a form of self-destruction,
Right.
stemming from internalized homophobia
Yeah.
or unresolved trauma.
Yeah. It's not just about the physical act of sex.
Right.
It's about the emotional and psychological factors
Right.
that drive those behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's why approaching this issue with compassion and understanding rather than judgment and shame is just so important.
Yeah. This concept of negotiated safety in serodiscordant couples really, really stood out to me.
Yeah, you mean where one partner is HIV positive and the other is HIV negative.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they agree to have unprotected sex.
Yeah.
Only with each other.
Yeah. I think it's a controversial practice.
It is. And it really highlights those complexities of intimacy and risk.
It does.
In the context of HIV,
Yeah.
it makes you think about how different relationships navigate these issues.
That does.
And the challenges they face.
Yeah.
But it's not without risks, of course.
Of course not. And acknowledging those risks and making informed choices is paramount.
As we kind of wrap up this part of the conversation, I'm realizing there's no easy answer when it comes to barebacking.
You're right. It's a multifaceted issue with no simple solutions. It's about individual choices, relationship dynamics, community norms, access to healthcare, and so much more.
It requires a multifaceted approach, addressing the issue on multiple levels, from the individual to the societal.
Yeah, and a combination of education, prevention, support, and advocacy.
It's clear why barebacking is such a polarizing issue.
It is. It touches on these really sensitive and deeply personal topics. Sexuality, health, risk, and responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get caught up in moral judgments.
But I think it's important to step back from that.
I agree.
And try to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, to try and understand the complexities.
Yeah.
And the human stories behind the behavior.
Because ultimately it's about people's lives.
It is.
And well-being.
Yeah.
That's what we need to prioritize.
I completely agree.
One thing this deep dive has really highlighted for me is the importance of language.
How so?
The way we talk about barebacking,
Okay.
it can either perpetuate stigma or promote understanding.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to use language that is accurate, respectful, and inclusive.
And avoid generalizations.
Yes.
And judgments.
Yeah,
Because everyone's experience with barebacking is different.
it is.
One thing that's becoming clear to me is that barebacking isn't just about sex.
It's about so much more.
It's about intimacy, connection, identity, self-worth,
Yeah.
this search for pleasure and meaning
Yeah.
in a world that often tells us we're not worthy.
That's a profound insight. It's like barebacking is a symptom of a deeper societal issue.
And addressing that issue requires more than just telling people to use condoms.
I agree.
It requires a fundamental shift in attitudes and beliefs.
And a commitment to creating a more just and equitable world.
A world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that this conversation isn't just about barebacking. It's about creating a better future for all of us.
And that's a worthy goal to strive for.
It certainly is.
This deep dive has been quite a journey.
It's challenged our assumptions and broadened our understanding.
And I think it's left us with more questions than answers.
But that's the nature of complex issues. They require that ongoing dialogue and exploration.
And a willingness to challenge our own beliefs and biases.
Absolutely.
The biggest takeaway for me is the importance of empathy.
Yeah.
To try and understand the motivations and experiences of others, even if we don't agree with their choices.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, we're all in this together.
We are. We need to support each other on this journey.
Well said. I think that's a good place to pause for now.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's good to kind of let this all sink in.
And continue the conversation in our own lives.
Exactly. This is about more than just barebacking.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and empowered to make healthy choices.
That's a world worth fighting for.
It really is. And speaking of creating that world, one thing that stood out in the source material is the role of community in addressing these complexities of barebacking.
Absolutely. It's not just about individual choices. It's about fostering a supportive environment that embraces, open dialogue and encourages healthy behaviors.
We touched on organizations like the San Francisco AIDS Foundation earlier,
Yeah.
but there are so many others doing incredible work.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned Gay Men's Health Crisis,
Yeah.
AIDS Project Los Angeles.
Yeah.
What are some of the things they're doing?
Well, these organizations and many others like them, they're working tirelessly to really shift the conversation away from shame and blame and towards understanding and shared responsibility. They're providing these vital services like HIV testing, pre-P access, counseling, creating these spaces where people can get the support they need without judgment.
And it seems like those community-level interventions are making a difference.
They are. Yeah. By providing accessible resources and fostering that open communication, they're empowering individuals to take control of their sexual health.
Right.
And make more informed choices.
Which is so crucial.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the stigma that still surrounds barebacking.
You're right. And these organizations are so instrumental in breaking down those barriers and creating an environment where people can talk openly about their experiences and access the support they need.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
Right? Recognizing everyone's journey is different and offering a range of options to help them navigate those choices.
Absolutely.
Which kind of brings up, harm reduction again.
It does. That's a great connection. Harm reduction is a key principle in the work that these organizations do. They understand that people engage in risky behavior for all sorts of reasons, and instead of preaching abstinence, they provide practical tools and strategies to minimize those negative consequences.
So what does that look like in practice?
It can take many forms, depending on the specific needs of the community.
Okay.
It could be as simple as promoting condom use, providing clean needles to reduce the risk of transmission through shared equipment, offering educational workshops on safer sex practices.
And as we discussed before, it's not just about the physical aspects, it's also addressing the mental and emotional factors that contribute to barebacking.
Absolutely.
Right.
Many organizations offer mental health services tailored to the needs of the gay male community, addressing issues like internalized homophobia, trauma from the AIDS crisis, and the psychological impacts of stigma and discrimination.
It's about creating that space where people feel safe, understood, and supported.
Exactly, and where they can access the resources they need to heal, grow, and make healthier choices that align with their values.
Going through all these sources, I'm realizing how much work still needs to be done to really address this effectively. It's a complex issue.
It is.
With deeply rooted causes.
You're right. It's an ongoing challenge that requires, a multifaceted approach, and we need to address it on multiple levels.
What can we do? Where do we go from here?
Well, we need to keep pushing for better education, more accessible healthcare, a reduction in stigma and discrimination.
Yeah.
But most importantly, we need to keep having these conversations.
To raise awareness, share information, and challenge harmful attitudes.
Exactly.
And belief.
By talking openly and honestly about these issues, we can foster a greater sense of understanding and empathy.
Right.
Which is essential for creating lasting change.
And creating a healthier, more supportive environment for everyone.
That's the ultimate goal. A world where people feel empowered to make choices that align with their values and protect their well-being.
Right.
And where they can embrace their sexuality without shame or fear.
That's a vision worth striving for.
It is. And I think this deep dive has given us a roadmap to get there. We've explored the complexities, the challenges, and the opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
And we've been reminded of the power of empathy, understanding, and collective action.
So let's take these insights with us.
Yeah.
And continue working towards that world.
Yeah.
Where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the complex world of barebacking. I hope you found this exploration as thought-provoking as we did.
We've covered a lot of ground, and it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
But by understanding the history, the psychology, and the social dynamics at play, we can approach this issue with greater nuance and compassion.
And ultimately, that's what matters most. If anything resonated with you today, we encourage you to continue the conversation. Talk to your friends, your partners, your community.
Let's work together to create a world where we can all embrace our sexuality with joy, freedom, and safety.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep.